The first ever trilateral summit in the White House last week between the Philippines, Japan, and the United States helped to draw attention to other aspects of our maritime conflict with China. But Ayungin or Second Thomas Shoal is the current flashpoint, and tensions remain high. The next stage of confrontation, what will that look like? Good evening. I'm John Nery, and you are in the Public Square. Last week, we tried to understand the tensions in the West Philippine Sea from a non-military perspective. Tonight, we look at it from the military and security POV. I'm happy to say that we are joined tonight by retired Navy Rear Admiral Rommel Jude, Professor of Practice at the Ateneo School of Government. Welcome back, Admiral Ong, and thank you for joining us in the Public Square.
Thank you, John. Good evening to your viewers.
Let me start with the latest of your occasional commentaries for Rappler, where you spoke of the primacy of national resolve. Now, national resolve sounds suspiciously like political will, the often offered solution to many of our national problems. What did you mean by that phrase, national resolve, and by primacy?
Okay, I'm taking off from the recent statement of the President Marcos on Filipinos will not yield, or Filipinos will not yield. So to me, that's sort of a battle cry or a rallying point in terms of harnessing yung energy nating ng Filipino public towards yung problem or yung situation we are facing in the West Philippine Sea. Resolve or political will, as you call it, means we need to work together. We need to stand as one. And we need one solid perspective in terms of addressing this. Unfortunately, there are many voices and many opinions with regards to that concern in the West Philippine Sea. And it's moving towards nagiging divisive na issue, when in fact it should be a unifying issue. Hence the need for the necessary yung resolve within the Filipino community.
I get that. There's much more traction these days on social media platforms about whether being dragged to war and so on. But I think very consistent for over a decade now, Philippine public opinion has been very much in support of a stronger stance against China's aggression in the West Philippine Sea. Since I think 2012, we've tracked public opinion. A great majority of Filipinos support more aggressive, more assertive responses to China. So maybe the divisiveness is only among, a certain sector, maybe not the public. How do you
you
see
are correct.
Public opinion?
Actually, consistent naman yung surveys with respect to the West Philippine Sea issue. And you are correct that the divisiveness is not necessarily among the general public, but within the, what we would say, the political leadership or in the leadership class ng Filipino natin. And there are other factors that drive that divisiveness, and it's not necessarily related to the West Philippine Sea.
Okay. Yeah.
What we are seeing now is a parang convergence between that problem sa West Philippine Sea and domestic politics natin. Yung driver nun is not necessarily related to the substantive issues related to West Philippine Sea.
When it comes to national resolve now, does that mean that we are in need of a common military perspective? That we see, as a people, or the great majority of the people, see the same security concerns and will approve the same security response?
Okay, I think you're taking off, that question takes off from the fact that we've just officially terminated or completed yung ating counterinsurgency program. That's based on the pronouncement of the President as well as the armed forces. So we are in transition towards looking at external defense. Okay. as a major concern, having resolved, at least substantively resolve yung ating internal stability issues or internal security issues.
In terms of specifics, Admiral, what do you understand the President's Filipinos do not yield statement to refer to? No? Are we talking about Ayungin Shoal and continuing replenishment of that isolated military outpost? Are we talking about reclaiming our rights to Scarborough Shoal? Those are two very different concerns. Is the President going to put forward through the National Maritime Council perhaps a security platform that more people can get behind?
Well, you have to look at Ayungin Shoal not as just as Ayungin Shoal. No?
Okay.
Titingnan din natin yan parang that's our alamo eh. That's yung optics niya eh. That's the symbol of the Filipinos' will to stand for what he believes in.
Okay.
And doon yung optics na nacha-challenge yung ating sovereign rights. Doon din yung optics na nacha-challenge yung character ng Pilipino and what he stands for. So, but I would understand that when the President said the Filipinos do not yield, it takes consideration all other dimensions, no? So, it's not only Ayungin Shoal but the entire West Philippine Sea. It's not only the West Philippine Sea but rather the entire spectrum of challenges that is impinging on us, and ang driver niyan would be the Chinese Communist Party. So, maraming aspeto doon sa pananaw na yun o yung statement na yun.
So Ayungin Shoal remains a flashpoint precisely because it's like the Alamo, as you said. It's a symbol of our resolve to fight back. In your latest commentary, you did say that perhaps the best way or the most efficient way to replace the rusting Sheram Madre is like an off-the-shelf oil rig. But you said it was probably not politically correct at this time to replace it with like a refurbished oil rig that can stand as a military outpost in Ayungin Shoal. Why not?
Well, there's a logical technical solution. Then there's a politically correct solution, driven by current circumstances. If you work for a technical logical solution now, it might be considered escalatory. Okay. Yung hidwaan would be escalatory. So you do not want to put more fire, more oil on the fire, so to speak, no. But I do remain that if you want to solve it technically, that would be the appropriate solution. But I foresee that our political leadership or even our military leadership would vacillate. Ipo-push nila ngayon yung ano na yan. Given yung toxicity ng hidwaan natin with the CCP in terms of yung battle of narratives that's being carried out in the public opinion space.
Admiral, you served as Commander of Naval Forces West and retired as Vice Commander of the entire Philippine Navy. Can I ask you to hazard a guess? How long will the Sheram Madre remain afloat, or half afloat and half beached on Ayungin Shoal?
Well,
how long will it remain useful?
When I was still in the active service, and maybe 2017 or 2018, we conducted a parang informal study, engineering study. So ang projection on was 2 years na lang.
Wow. Okay.
That was 2018.
Okay.
And it's now 2024.
That's right. Yeah.
So that means it went beyond yung projections ng ginawa noong several years ago. And pwede pa siyang tumagal. But hindi lang naman yung barko yung pinag-usapan natin eh. It's yung habitability sa loob.
Yeah.
So if yung barko lang pinag-usapan natin, I think it will withstand the test of time and yung environment, marine environment, challenges of marine environment. But we are putting people, we are putting troops inside and we have to sustain yung ano niya, yung quality, yung little quality of life that we can provide while they are stationed there. So yun yung inaayos natin.
Do we have a deadline beyond which we can't any longer put our servicemen there?
Ang perception ko kasi we've been doing minor repairs all the while. Hindi naman natigil yun So as you do minor repairs, you
prolong
you actually prolong it. Parang meron kang coaching parang meron kang sasakyan na 1970s or 1980s.
Okay.
It's old, it's decrepit, but if you put some minor repair jobs doon, tatagal pa rin siya. So same analogy for the Sheram Madre.
Okay.
Okay.
Admiral, I was struck by your latest commentary because it references this, perhaps to many of us, obscure series of maritime confrontations, the so-called Cod Wars, from the mid-1950s to the mid-1970s, between the United Kingdom and the much smaller state of Iceland. I think that was your basis for saying we need the primacy of national resolve. Take a look at, this is one of the most important lessons of the Cod Wars. Can you talk about the Cod Wars and what we can learn from?
Well, the Cod Wars started, I think, around 1950s, and it extended to the 60s and 70s. I think it was finally resolved sometime mid-70s. And you must remember that this was pre-UNCLOS. There was no United Nations Convention Law of the Sea at the time. So we have two states battling it out in the North Sea. And there's no demarcation kasi hindi pa clear wala pang exclusive economic zone noon no time na yon. And you have the United Kingdom or Britain with a much more modern or competent naval force being confronted or challenged by Iceland, which virtually has no navy at that time. And then Iceland was fighting for yung sarili niyang space. Cod is a fish. So they're actually, it's the driver of the conflict was yung access to fishing ground.
That's right.
Okay, sounds familiar. Okay, access to fishing ground. But the beauty of this is yung Iceland hindi siya natinag. And they fought tooth and nail to make sure that they are able to establish yung maritime interest nila at that time. And they were using tugboats. And nakikipagbungguan sila dun sa Royal Navy. Tsaka dun sa mga fishing boats ng...
That's right. One of the more fascinating things, I read up on it after I read your commentary, was the use of net cutters. So you have trawlers with nets from the UK going to that part of the sea, and then you would have the small boats from Iceland with net cutters that would cut the nets and isolate the boat. So, that would raise they would lose their catch. There were other innovative practices like boarding a ship and so on. Do you think we can apply that to our side of the world?
We have to think out of the box. Kasi gas-gas na yung winawater cannon tayo all the time gas-gas na rin yung we allow our fisher folks to be harassed at sea, helpless. I'm all for let's think out of the box, mindful of yung possibility of escalation. But as long as we keep within bounds na you don't use weapon systems, you don't use outright violence, kumbaga I think we can find that sweet spot na innovation, a tactical innovation to address this concern. Fight for our sovereign rights in a way that will demonstrate our resolve, quote-unquote our resolve, without being escalatory in terms of yung papasok dun sa narrative of war na, which we're trying to avoid.
Yeah. This ties in with what you said earlier about the primacy of national resolve now, because I don't think the tactical innovations of Iceland would have mattered if they didn't have like a solid leadership backed by overwhelming public support throughout those 2.5 decades or so.
That's
I mean,
correct.
they were really... part of the reason, if I understand correctly, was that the fish that the UK would have taken away from them represented a huge percentage of their GDP. But for the much bigger economy of the Great Britain, it was just like 1%. So they had very different stakes. And Iceland, because they depended on that, went to wage these Cod Wars. So we can learn technical innovations, thinking out of the box, right? But we have to also take a look at the box that they were in. No? These are two allies. They are both members of NATO, right? We are not military allies with China. I mean, is it really possible to apply the lessons from the Cod Wars to a situation where you have this country acting like it was the hegemon in this part of the world?
Well, we have to understand that we are tied to China in many other ways.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be because we are not allies in the military sense.
Okay.
But we have economic engagement with them. Kung titingnan mo, I may be wrong, no? But from what I'm getting in terms of yung economic profiling natin between China and the Philippines, we are a net importer, not a net exporter. That means hindi tayo ganun ka-dependent sa China in terms of our economy. That gives us more legroom compared to maybe the other ASEAN member states who are really tied up yung economy nila sa China. But there is, of course, ASEAN also. ASEAN would be the natural interlocutor if meron tayong hidwaan with China. And even the United States. United States has a very clear stake with respect to yung engagement nila with China. They are now strategically peer competitors, but they have to work together as well. So maraming ways. In fact, kung titingnan mo, paano ba tayo nagka-problema doon sa Scarborough Shoal, yung Stanhope? It was yung dynamic between US, Philippines, and China that created that situation.
And also the dynamic between the Foreign Ministry of China and its People's Liberation Army. I think that we got the signal from the Foreign Ministry, but which doesn't really have the real power. So we thought that they would also withdraw their ships from Scarborough Shoal. When we withdrew ours, they remained there.
My understanding kasi is that the Foreign Ministry within the hierarchy of power within China or within the party, hindi siya ganun
That's right.
ka-powerful compared to, let's say, maybe the United States with respect to State Department tsaka yung Department of Defense.
That's right. Admiral, in one of your earlier commentaries, you used the framework of maritime insurgency to analyze Beijing's and Xi Jinping's policy toward the South China Sea. So, can you walk us through this? In this framework, China is the insurgent?
Correct. Well, balikan natin, ano ba yung mantra natin when we confront this issue sa West Philippine Sea or sa South China Sea? We are all for protecting the international order. And we all know that yung international order natin, what we have now, is a product of yung Bretton Woods Accord of just in 1945, just before the end of World War II. So that is the international order we are protecting or securing. Kasi that establish yung concept of the global commons. Okay? Yung dagat. Kasi ang understanding nun is maritime trade or the trade relations among states in a post-World War II environment would be heavily dependent on maritime trade. Okay? That's why that is the current order. Now, what China is trying, or the Chinese Communist Party or CCP is trying to do is to change that order.
Okay.
And it is leveraging yung domestic laws niya parang take-off point. For example, yung Coast Guard law, National Intelligence law, everything. And it doesn't happen sa maritime environment lang. Even in mainland China, when it deals with foreign companies na has investments in mainland China, they are now trying to impose yung national laws nila to multinational companies that are operating in mainland China. So, as an insurgent, you are trying to replace the existing order. Now, how would you go about it in the first place? You have to subvert it first. Okay, how do you subvert it? Number one would be putting people in critical areas that has influence on the order. Example, United Nations agencies. Okay, so they put people as the head of, they sponsor people to be head of those agencies, whether they are Chinese of nationality or those that are more or less share the same values as them. Okay, dito sa West Philippine Sea, how do they subvert the order? Simple. By imposing yung domestic laws nila sa exclusive economic zone natin. And it is subverting the UNCLOS. By saying, yes, I signed the UNCLOS, but UNCLOS, yung domestic laws ko have primacy over UNCLOS. And UNCLOS doesn't apply when I deploy my Coast Guard or militia vessels dyan sa exclusive economic zone ng Pilipinas. Okay? So that's a version of the current laws and protocols that we have in place. Gradually, it becomes facts on the ground. If you change facts on the ground, then it becomes iba na pala yung patakaran. Merong written, merong practical.
You know, this framework helps me understand something else that you wrote, no? When you said that China was losing the hearts and minds of Filipinos. When I first read that, I thought, are they in fact out to win hearts and influence people? But as a maritime insurgency, the Chinese approach would have a persuasion element, not just coercion. Tama ba yun? Do I understand that correctly?
In concept, tama. In execution nila, mali. Okay? Kasi if I was the Chinese Communist Party and my intention is to subvert the order, I would have done it differently. I would not have antagonized my neighbors. I would have looked for opportunities to engage them. For example, instead of harassing yung fisher folks natin using their Chinese Coast Guard vessels, I would have engaged yung Pilipinas na, can we do exercises with your Coast Guard and my Coast Guard? And we do practical activities at sea. That would have been the neighborly way of doing things. That would have been the ASEAN Oriental way of doing things, diba? You try to be good neighbors to your neighbors. But ang ano nila is ang approach nila, they took it differently. Naging hard sell sila yung approach nila. And it is not surprising that you cannot convince Filipinos to be sympathetic to Chinese cause. But let's look at the recent survey sa yung ISEAS. Yung ISEAS survey of they have at least more than 1,900 respondents yata.
Alright.
And in terms of those respondents, when they were asked who did they prefer, the United States or China, guess sinong countries na lang prefers the US as partner? Philippines at Vietnam. The rest of ASEAN,
even Singapore
is prefers China. Although konti pa lang in difference, but yung trending niya nag-shift na compared to last year.
What explains that?
So my point is, it may not work for us, but it works for the rest of the ASEAN member states.
I see.
So, do you say hindi siya successful? Hindi. I think he was successful kasi hindi lang naman Pilipinas yung kinikater niya.
Admiral, the Philippine government has been fighting an insurgency for over 50 years. What have we learned from counterinsurgency campaigns that we can apply to the maritime insurgency of China?
Basic, and dito there's convergence between counterinsurgency construct tsaka sa maritime strategy. We've allowed them to dominate or to exercise yung coercive tactics nila within our backyard sa exclusive economic zone natin. We have not challenged them. So incrementally, gradually, we are surrendering yung space na yon. Now, ano ba ang target niya? Ang target naman niya hindi military. Ang target niya is to prevent us from economically accessing that space by our civilian community. Hindi naman yung military or yung Coast Guard eh. So, na-threaten niya yung energy security natin, na-threaten niya yung food security issues natin. That deprives us of yung what is supposed to be resources na sa atin.
On yet another commentary, you wrote about what you call the gray zone obsession. It's clear to me from reading it and also from offline conversations with you that you do not share this obsession. What are the limits of the gray zone, and why should we not obsess about it?
Okay. Number one, gray zone is, I believe, a concept developed by American and Japanese academics. Okay. When I studied in the U.S. Naval War College, there is such thing that they told us to look out for. Yung concept of mirror imaging.
Okay.
You tried, and in the way we teach it in school now sa Ateneo, it's yung biases. You sort of unconsciously impose your biases in trying to interpret yung actions ng kabilang party.
Okay.
So that's one. So gray zone is not a Chinese construct. It's a Western construct.
Okay.
So that's one. Now, I believe that to understand yung dynamic of how they do things, we need to look at it from their point of view, their doctrines, their approaches from a naval, maritime, or even from a communist party perspective. Okay. Pangalawa, I'm a purist. Kumbaga, I'd rather to understand it better, I'd rather go back to the concepts born out of naval strategy. Okay, so instead of gray zone, balik tayo kay Alfred Thayer Mahan, who is an American naval strategist. And actually, the Chinese also read Mahan. And they're actually following his book. Kaya sabi ko, when you understand yung components of sea power as outlined by Alfred Thayer Mahan, checklist mo yung ginagawa ng China, papasok siya eh. Okay? But gray zone is, I call gray zone ang gray zone trap eh. Parang ang analogy ko dun is, you dug a hole, a very, very deep hole.
Okay.
Tumalong ka ron. Tapos, suddenly you realize you cannot find a way to get out of it. Okay? Kasi it offers no solution eh. Now, dito, doctrinally, if you're confronted with yung activities ng China and you interpret it in naval terms, which is actually assertion of sea control on the part of Chinese maritime forces, then ang textbook solution yan is tapatan mo through naval presence or naval patrol. Okay. Hindi yung one of the unintended consequence kasi ng actions ng China is it creates indecision on our part. Ang tinitira niya actually is yung mindset ng decision maker. In Air Force language, they call it disrupting yung OODA loop.
Okay.
The OODA loop is the how you orient towards a problem and how you make a decision then act on it. Okay. So dinidisrupt nila to the point na hindi ka na makadecide. Okay. And dito ganun din. Hindi tayo makadecide kung ano yung gagawin natin sa kanila.
Okay. I want to be clear. Are you suggesting that we should abandon the white versus white, or Coast Guard versus Coast Guard policy and send our Navy ships instead of our Coast Guard ships?
Hindi naman. Kasi ang situation kasi na yun, parang nakalock tayo doon sa white on white.
Okay.
To the exclusion of all other things. Okay. For example, if you're confronted with a militia or Chinese Coast Guard vessels, obviously, ang itatapat mo ron, Coast Guard din, para white on white. But they're not those assets are not operating in everywhere, in all areas, no? We need to also deploy our Navy on the some parts kasi we need to go them to conduct patrol eh. So, you have to be in tandem yung
So, having joint patrols, not just military or naval exercises, but actual joint patrols with Australia, with Japan, with the United States, that would be one way of breaking out of this gray zone trap?
Yeah, correct. That's correct.
What are other ways that we can...
Well, bago ko tayo pumunta ng joint patrol, I would say unilateral patrol muna eh. We do it ourselves muna.
Oh, okay.
Kasi before we can ask other countries to help us, we need to help ourselves first. And although granted we have resource issues or capacity issues, but we need to put out there kung ano man yung available na resources natin and project yung project yung interest natin.
But it's a big area. Where should we conduct the patrols? Where are the strategic points?
Okay, if you're trying to avoid escalation or you're trying to avoid direct conflict, then we patrol yung open spaces.
Okay.
You have to show the flag doon
Just to show the flag, yeah.
Oh. I'll give you two examples. Yung recent one, in the news, yung hinaras or tinapatan nila yung ating, I think there were 2 survey vessels natin escorted by a Philippine Coast Guard vessel.
That's right, yeah.
And the way I read it, it just happened 35 nautical miles from the nearest shoreline. So that means, inabangan tayo dun sa 12 nautical mile territorial waters natin. Then, binantayan na yung yung nagsasurvey na convoy, yung contingent. Okay? So they're trying to pin us down to the 12 nautical mile. So we need to patrol yung beyond the 12 nautical, yung exclusive economic zone natin. In a sustained manner, hindi yung padapo-dapo lang. Kasi
Okay, so unilateral patrols by the Philippine Navy.
Yeah, and the Coast Guard.
And the Coast Guard. Joint patrols with our allies. What else? How do we break out of the gray zone trap?
One example, push na natin yung survey or exploration ng reed bank.
I'm sorry, of?
Sa reed
bank. Okay.
Kasi that is one of the areas affected by this gray zone or these coercive activities. We were now forced to kumbaga magdalawang isip tayo to conduct yung economic activities natin. Remember yung Malampaya they say Malampaya will only last up to 2027.
Okay.
So in a matter of 3 years, magkakaproblema tayo in terms of yung power situation.
What does the Philippine Navy have to do to become a source of credible deterrence? And is it getting what it needs to get from?
My sense is they've already developed the requisite program or plan to do that. But it cannot happen overnight kasi
of course, yeah.
Capability building takes years. So if let's say I buy something today, I will get it maybe 5-6 years down the road. Pabilis na kung 3 years. So you need to think of addressing paano yung gap na yun. There's also such thing as we need to develop industrial capacity to support ourselves. We cannot rely on the acquisition program dependent on foreign sources. And I think most of the region who have these similar problems have also resolve it in that manner. They now are looking at yung industrial base nila. Okay? Para to support yung kanilang modernization programs.
In another of your commentaries, you talked about China playing the long game. We should play the long game too, right? We should think beyond this administration or the next administration. I mean, it should be like a 20-30 year, maybe even longer time frame.
Actually, when one opinion there is kasi we have the 2040 ambition, 2040, di ba? In terms of yung economic planning natin. But yung ating security component is dependent on the 6-year cycles ng presidential cycles.
That's right.
Okay. So, we were pushing for, baka pwede namang, kung kaya, at least tapatan mo yung 2040, ambition 2040 timeline. Para ma-detach mo sa sa 6-year cycle yung Kasi parang boom and bust tayo . we do something, then after 6 years, things can change. And we saw that happen. From the previous administration to the current administration, nagbago siya.
Speaking of the previous administration, in terms of military opportunity cost, what did we lose in the 6 years of Duterte relative to China's claims?
We lost our exclusive economic zone. Kasi
Despite the arbitral award.
there was an instruction really to directing the Navy to stop patrolling yung beyond territorial waters. So ibig sabihin, kumbaga, let's say sa barangay mo, sinabihan ka na yung barangay tanod, huwag ka na magpatrolya doon sa labas ng bahay mo. So yung kalsada ng barangay, open field yun, kahit sino pwedeng gumala doon. So essentially, ganun yung nangyari. So because of that, may vacuum na na-create, we were not patrolling our exclusive economic zone. Doon pumasok yung China. So we lost our exclusive economic zone.
Ayungin as still the flashpoint, or maybe there are other flashpoints. I'm trying to imagine, what will the next confrontation look like? China, on the same day that we had the four countries conducting a joint patrol, said they also conducted military exercises in another part of the South China Sea. I'm sure they would have some reply to the trilateral summit last week. What should we anticipate as the next form of confrontation?
Sana hindi naman confrontation, no?
Well,
siguro, next flashpoint or next areas that magkakatunggali. I'm looking at Bashi Channel o tsaka Luzon Strait, in Northern Philippines. Kasi if you try to read yung moves nila for the past few years, parang doon papunta eh. And between...
Closer to Taiwan.
Yeah, closer to Taiwan. Between that area and, let's say, Ayungin Shoal, from the Chinese Communist Party perspective, mas importante sa akin yung Taiwan eh. Core interest yun ng party. Right. Although they also claim South China Sea as a core interest. But makikita mo na yung galaw nila for the past few years dito sa Northern Philippines. Okay? If you recall, they've tried to invest in Fuga Island. Okay? They've tried to invest in those two other islands doon sa Subic Bay. If you go by yung reports recently, you have a substantial number of Chinese students in Tuguegarao. Okay, so then we have that concern about one local government official who seems to be out of sync with what's happening in the country and has a totally different approach to foreign policy as opposed to the president or the commander-in-chief. Okay? May sarili siyang linya na in-espouse. So I think major concern natin would be Northern Philippines.
If, as you said, we should pursue Reed Bank now, also as a way to get out of the gray zone trap, we should expect that will become Flashpoint too?
Yeah, kasi and they've done that before naman. They tried to prevent us from actually conducting a survey. But ano to naging hostage tayo doon sa Reed Bank If we do not want confrontation, which we've actually been doing now, we avoided actually pursuing the survey. But ano yung kapalit nun? Ano yung cost sa atin nun? That cost will come on. Masisingilin tayo in 2027. So ano ba yung game plan ng kabila dito? Are they trying to push us to the wall such that, kasi hindi naman sa kanila issue yung energy. Ang issue sa kanila yung acceptance natin na sila yung may-ari nung area na yun
Yeah.
And baka ang game plan nila is kung desperate na lang tayo to secure that energy resource, is pumayag tayo na, sige, payag na kami, kayo may-ari niyan. Allow us to develop it already para we can have that energy resource. Okay? That may be yung thinking nila.
Admiral, maybe just a couple more questions. We're running long, but this has been very informative, no? Is there any danger of a shooting war?
I think wala. You must understand, no, there are two layers to conflict. And what I've been trying to say is we were in the middle of a propaganda war which started April last year. When the President Marcos announced yung EDCA sites, tapos yung certain enhancements on our relationship with the US as an alliance. Okay. So that spun off a lot of we call it troll activity, no? Troll activity in social media, tsaka even in mainstream media. So we've already identified yung cast of characters. Even if we don't name them, we know who they are.
Yeah.
And this has been going on since last year. They started off with a narrative na pro-China messaging. But I think they were adapting, so they shifted to an anti-war narrative. And that yun pa rin yung naririnig nating ngayon eh. Na para bang sige, wag kayong kasi pag pinush natin yung China, magkakagera tayo. Okay. But I don't think not. China has no interest in starting a war or a conflict. Particularly in fact na we are in alliance with the United States ay merong mutual defense treaty. The MDT is like a deterrent, a deterrence. And China has no interest in having that deterrent or that MDT activated or invoked. Okay. Kaya nga yung tactics nila is below kaya we use the term gray zone, but it's actually non-kinetic in nature nila. Yung pinaka-weapon system nila ngayon is yung water cannon.
They tried the laser once, right?
Yeah.
They tried ramming a couple of times.
Within the context of rules of engagement, those are still non-kinetic in nature.
Okay.
And what we've noticed is, of course, they have not gone beyond the threshold of using actually weapon system. To that, they will stick to that, I think.
From the military perspective, does it matter? So I've heard this often, no? This argument that, the United States remains uncommitted to our territorial claims and even some of our maritime claims. But does that matter as long as they remain committed to the Mutual Defense Treaty?
I'll answer that differently, no?
Okay.
Kasi nagiging parang crutch sa planning and yung in terms of mindsetting, nagiging crutch yung yung MDT. Para bang andiyan naman yung mga Amerikano eh. We can basta andiyan yung mga Amerikano, okay tayo. Okay. Which I think is you're starting off in the wrong foot eh. And I've said this before and I got medyo nabash ako doon. But ang point ko kasi is bago tayo umasa sa ibang bansa o ibang lahi, kailangan matuto muna tayo na pangalagaan yung sarili nating seguridad. Okay. From there, then we can work with yung partnerships with other countries and yung alliance natin with the United States. Na in terms of actually defending yung common interest. There are common interests, there are also conflicting interests with the United States. So hindi naman all that 100% yan magpapanagpo tayo eh. In terms of looking at, say, South China Sea, West Philippine Sea. So we share a common interest na ayaw natin ng conflict o ayaw natin ng gera. So that's why we all calibrate our actions.
Thank you, Rear Admiral Rommel Ong, for a clarifying gray zone breaking discussion. Many thanks.
Thank you, John.
That's it for us tonight. The next step for engaged citizens, as always, is to take a more active part in rebuilding our democracy. See you in the public square. This is John Nery. Thank you and good night.